Sewing an ashoke dress is completely different from sewing a dress with other fabrics. If you are watching this video, I need you to know that there are lots of techniques you need to apply when you are sewing an ashoke that you don't necessarily have to apply when you are sewing the same dress with another fabric. In this tutorial, I'm going to be putting you through step by step on how to cut and sew an ashoke, especially for a bride. I made this ashoke bridal outfit not too long ago, and in this tutorial, I'm going to be teaching you step by step on how to cut and sew an ashoke for a bride, that it comes out perfect and neat. And the techniques I'll be sharing with you in this tutorial also applies to when you are cutting an ashoke for any style, for any outfit at all, especially an ashoke that will have lining like the one that you are currently seeing on your screen. My name is Oluwatosin. In case it's the first time you are seeing my channel, and you're welcome. To all my returning subscribers, you're also welcome. If this is your first time here, please consider subscribing and turn on the notification bell so that you'll be notified next time I upload a new tutorial on this channel. In this video, I'm going to be teaching you steps and techniques that you must apply whenever you have to cut and sew an ashoke. So don't skip any part so that you don't miss any points that I might have said. Just watch this video from beginning till the end. With all this being said, let's jump right into the tutorial. To successfully cut and sew a bridal ashoke like this for any adult, the basic measurements you need to measure are the ones you are currently seeing on your screen. These measurements are not negotiable. It's important you measure them on whoever you are making the outfit for. So I used ashoke fabric for this dress, obviously, and right here is the ashoke fabric that I used. This ashoke is a bridal set. I think they call it loom. It doesn't come in pieces like that gele kind of ashoke. It comes big and wide like this. I think it comes 3 or 4 in a pack, but this is the bridal set ashoke, which is what I would advise, that if you have to sew ashoke as a dress, a complete dress, especially a fitted dress, especially for a bride, a fitted dress is advisable to get this ashoke that doesn't come in pieces. It's advisable to get this ashoke that comes big and wide like this. So that is one technique you have to apply when you have to cut and sew an ashoke for a bride. Well, it's not as if you still can't use the pieces ashoke to sew a dress, but trust me when I tell you that it is more stressful, and this one that doesn't come in pieces is less stressful, although it's still stressful when you are sewing ashoke, unlike when you are using other fabrics to sew that same style. But this one that comes wide like this gives you less stress, and it gives you a more neat dress, unlike when you use the one that comes in pieces. The second tip I'll be giving you in this tutorial is the kind of lining you use to line your ashoke is very important. It matters a lot. So whenever you have to sew ashoke, it's advisable to use a cotton lining or you use a doll face. Please don't use a rubber lining. Don't use taffeta to line an ashoke. It's best to use either a cotton lining, and you can as well use a bridal satin or a doll face satin. But using a rubber lining or a taffeta will not give you a neat job when you have to sew an ashoke dress. So in my case, I used this ashoke and I used doll face. Fortunately, my ashoke and my doll face, the shade is almost the same, that you hardly differentiate between my ashoke and my doll face. So I used doll face for mine, and I started cutting by cutting the lower part of this dress, which is the pencil part. And I started my cutting by cutting the lining first, which in this case is the doll face. I'll be calling it lining because it's serving as a lining. But don't forget I said I used doll face satin. So I'll be cutting the lining first, and for the back panel of this dress, I'll be using 2 layers of lining, but for the front I'll be using 1 lining. So for the back I'll be lining it twice, and for the front I'll be lining it once. And for those back lining, one will be longer than the other with like 1 or 2 inches. So the first thing I did was to check the highest measurement between this person's waist, since this is the lower part of the dress, is coming from the waist. So I checked the highest measurement between her waist and her hip. It happens to be her hip. And then that hip, I added 14 inches allowance. And this is when my next tip comes in. Whenever you have to cut and sew ashoke, especially fitted ones like this for a fitted dress, it's advisable to add more allowance than you use on a good day. If I was to cut this dress with another fabric, I would have added just 12 inches allowance because I love to use 2 inches as my sewing allowance. So I would have added 12 inches to this hip, but considering that I'm using ashoke, I want to use 3 or 3.5 inches as the allowance while cutting, so I added 14. That's why I said you should not skip any part of this video, because as I'm progressing in this tutorial, I'm going to be dropping tips and tricks you need to apply. Like, they are not negotiable. You must apply them whenever you have to cut and sew ashoke, especially fitted dresses like this. And the reason you need to add more allowance than your usual allowance that you use on a good day is because ashoke shrinks depending on the temperature of the pressing iron you are using to press it, and aside that, it frays depending on how you have cut it. Yeah, so don't forget that I'm cutting my lining first, and after measuring that hip plus 14 inches, I folded it into 4, leaving zip allowance of 2.5 inches at the back. And for the length, I'm using the exact length I want this dress to be. Remember I said that the back will be lined twice. So those 2 linings that I'll use for the back, one will be the same length with the actual fabric, which is the ashoke. Is the second one that will be shorter with like 2 inches. So for now, I'm cutting the same length, like I'm considering the same length of the dress. So after doing this, the next I did was to divide our waist by 4. I marked that and I added 3.5 inches sewing allowance. There's something I consider, I call it first hip. Whenever I have to sew a fitted dress, I put it into consideration. It's basically the skirt waist. I don't just use it when I'm sewing a skirt, I also use it when I'm sewing a fitted outfit, and it is 4 inches away from the waistline. So on that 4 inches, I'll be dividing the first hip, which is the skirt waist, by 4, and I'll be adding sewing allowance of 3.5 inch. Then I'll proceed to the hip. The hip is another 4 inches away from that first hip. I'll be dividing the hip by 4, and I'll be adding 3.5 inches sewing allowance on that point. After all of this, the next is to connect these 3 points together, the allowance point, not the actual measurement point. And for the lower part of this dress, whatever the person's hip is, just deduct 4 to 6 inches depending on how fitted you want the lower part of it to be. In my case, I deducted just 4 inches. Our hip is 46, I deducted 4 inches, which makes it 42. Is that 42 that I divided by 4, and I added my sewing allowance of 3.5 inches. So you proceed to cutting this out. And since it's the lining that we are cutting first, you can use any scissors of your choice. So this lining that you've cut out, you use it to cut the actual fabric, which is the ashoke. Another tip that you need to have at the back of your mind when you want to cut ashoke is that do not use your ordinary scissors. It's either you are using that hot scissors, or you are using soldering iron that is very hot, or you are putting your scissors inside flame, like inside fire, before you use it. Because if you use your ordinary scissors, your ashoke will start pulling out before you finish sewing. As you are sewing, as you are turning, as you are doing everything, your ashoke will start pulling out and it will start reducing your measurement. So it's always advisable to use either that electric hot scissors or soldering iron, or if you are using normal scissors, put it inside fire, inside flame of fire, before you use it, so that it will be hot. So you will use this lining to cut the ashoke. For the front ashoke, you eventually reduce the lining because you are using this lining to turn it. You reduce the lining with like 2 or 3 inches before you cut on the ashoke, as in the ashoke will be longer than the lining with like 2 or 3 inches. But for the back panel, you remember that you are using double lining for the back. So the ashoke will be the first, like the ashoke will be the same length with the back lining. Then you will now cut another lining that is like 2 to 3 inches shorter than the first lining and the ashoke for the back. When I say lining, I'm still referring to doll face. You are still using doll face as the second lining. So that is it for the cutting of the pencil part of this dress. I don't want this video to get too lengthy because I don't want to skip any important detail that I'm supposed to talk about. I don't want to skip any tip and tricks that I'm supposed to talk about on how to cut and sew an ashoke fabric. That's why I'm going to be doing this video in 3 parts. So in the second part, I'll be talking about how I was able to cut the upper part, which is the corset part of the dress, and I'll be talking about how I was able to sew the rest of the dress. If you are interested in watching any of the part 2 or part 3, click on this box that are currently showing on your screen. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any question, ask me down in the comment section. If you've not subscribed, please subscribe. As much as possible, help me share my tutorial, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.